welcome to everybody. It's wonderful that you could all make it today. This is, for me, a very important session. As a university lecturer, I've been doing my work, most of my work online, but am now back a little bit on site. But I'm aware that it has changed everything. And I was interested to hear from one of our people online, Francis Brassard, an old friend and colleague from Dubrovnik, saying actually a lot of people were already working online before they began with the lockdowns to have to actually do everything at home. And I think Ursula is going to mention that as she goes through the session today. Ursula is a senior lecturer in German, and she works at the Open University in the United Kingdom. This is a very, very famous university, combining online and face-to-face, and has been there for many, many years, and is actually one of the most important and valued universities and institutions in British education and British culture. She's also an expert consultant with the European Commission on Modern Languages, ECML, and co-editor of a book very soon to be published called Developing Online Language Pedagogies. And that's going to be published by Castledown Publishers, either end 22 or early 2023. And that I hope I'll be able to put the details of that on the chat in a few minutes. And also, she is the author of Technology and Language Teaching, published by Cambridge University Press in 2022, this year. So it won't surprise you if I say again, the topic is how online language teaching has changed the profession. I want to know what it's done to all of us, Ursula. So over to you.
Okay, let me just start the screen share and show my PowerPoint. And straight away, apologies, because Zoom is not my tool, not my favorite tool for online video conferencing, but I'm going to use it, and I'm going to share all my mistakes and all my problems with you while I'm doing so. So just bear with me while I'm calling up the PowerPoint. And also try to put it into presentation mode. So just let me know if you can see the PowerPoint with a lot of wood stacked up really neatly. Yep, and the title of slide of the presentation. Thank you so much. Okay, now I've already warned Barry and Thomas beforehand that I'm not talking for an hour. I can't do that. I'm a language teacher, so I need interaction. I need question, answer. I need your contributions when I'm asking questions. So feel free to interrupt at any time, or also use the text chat to share your ideas with me. But as Barry said, I'm going to talk a little bit about what we observed at the Open University before, during, and after the COVID pandemic, particularly at the height of the crisis when we had to go into lockdown, and when lots of language teachers had to move the language teaching online. Now, I'm going to talk a little bit about emergency remote teaching and emergency training, first of all. So that's the very first phase of the pandemic. Then I'm going to talk a little bit about the future after COVID, going to ask you questions as well. And I'm trying to get a little bit deeper into the question, what has changed, by talking about epistemological changes as well as just surface changes. And as I said, I'm going to ask you for your opinion again and again. So you will be interacting, I hope, online with tools like Mentimeter, Tricider, and Padlets. Right, now emergency remote teaching as a term that was coined at the beginning of the pandemic by Hodges and his colleagues. And I found that extremely useful, because we were trying to explain to people what you're doing now, or what you have to do, and going online without much preparation, without much training, and just teaching because you need to continue teaching in some way, is not what we normally would call online teaching. There's a difference between an emergency where you respond to the lack of face-to-face options. So you couldn't go into the classroom, you couldn't do your normal teaching. You just do it because you need to continue doing something for your students. There was a lot of investment in short-term fixes, and I'm sure you can all remember these things where lots of money actually was thrown into tools, sending laptops out to people, or very quick training sessions, or buying software in some cases. And somebody here from Greece, that some governments actually bought complete software packages for all their teachers to use. So there was a lot of investment in these short-term fixes. On the other hand, when we talk about online teaching at the Open University, this is much more of a planned strategic move from a face-to-face language teaching to an online or a mixed method, or a hybrid, as we now call it, teaching. It involves building a learning community, so you can't just expect students from one medium to another and they would behave in the same way. That doesn't happen, and it hasn't happened. But it's also supporting experiential learning and active learning on the point of the students and on the point of the teachers as well. It needs investment in long-term infrastructure and long-term staff development. And note the subtle difference here between staff training, just make them ready for doing the emergency teaching now, and staff development, where you really build up skills over a longer term. So just to take that argument straight away, that there is a difference between the ERT, the emergency remote teaching, and planned online teaching. But of course, at the Open University, because we are a distance teaching university, we had quite a lot of requests right at the beginning for doing this emergency training, for offering some training. And the group that I'm involved in with the European Center for Modern Languages in Graz, the ICT web group, we immediately offered to the ECML to provide some of this emergency training by doing webinars, short-term fixes. So this is spontaneous reaction to an emergency situation, a rapid response. We offered to thousands of teachers across Europe this online training, where we tried to show them a few tools they could use, and also how to use that and how to make it a bit more sustainable and humane to teach online. Before people joined the webinars, they filled in a very short online questionnaire. And one of the questions we asked straight away was, what are you going to take back to normal teaching afterwards? And in the discussion before the presentation, we heard some people, we tried to go back immediately to, as it was before, to immediately to face-to-face teaching, or try to avoid this emergency move to online teaching altogether. And this is one of the options of reactions that we found. There's lots of different responses on a scale from nothing, I'm taking nothing back to normal teaching, to everything. So this was May 2020, so it was really early on in the pandemic, and teachers were still trying to find their feet and what they had to do now. So lots of them were really unsure. They weren't sure yet what to take back. Then there were some people who looked at very specific things that could make their life easier afterwards, like moving homework online. A very simple thing. And I'm sure that nowadays lots of teachers collect homework online rather than having pieces of paper flying around everywhere. But on the other end of the scale, there is a realization of some of the teachers that students will not accept going back completely to as it was before. Students who have now become familiar with online tools, with online pedagogies as well, they will not accept the traditional teaching where they sort of are being fed knowledge from the teacher and are more passive maybe in a classroom, in a face-to-face classroom, than they had to be online. There's also the realization that the pedagogies had to adapt, and some teachers accepted that they are going to change the way that they are teaching, integrating new elements, but also integrating new pedagogy. And particularly, they realized some of the benefits of online teaching methods, that you could experiment with flipped classrooms, where you present the material first, ask the students to work with it, and in the synchronous sessions online or in the classroom, you would then discuss and find out whether the students had actually understood and integrated the new knowledge. Also, some of the teachers found that online teaching was so much more democratic. The students could participate in a different way than in the face-to-face classroom, also probably more actively, because lots of them can write together, or they can contribute at the same time, rather than in the face-to-face classroom where you need to wait your turns. And it definitely put the students at the center of education. So there's a whole gamut of responses, from I just want to go back to normal teaching to I want to change the way I'm teaching now, responding to this emergency. Okay. Based on these quick fire responses in the questionnaire, we then designed a questionnaire study specifically asking for the future after COVID. And this was coming at the end of 2020, beginning of 2021. We designed a questionnaire asking teachers across 15 different countries how they would see their future as language teachers once they get back. And in specific, we asked for a perspective of 10 years into the future. So this questionnaire study was translated into different languages and was sent out to, just go to the next slide. We got 109 responses, so 7 different languages, 109 responses. But basically it was only one big question asking these teachers to imagine a scenario 10 years in the future. What's going to happen? How is technology impacting their profession? How are they going to be qualified as language teachers in 2030? What qualities do they need to bring to language teaching? And also how are they going to evaluate that their teaching has been successful? How are they going to evaluate the students, but also their own teaching? And if you just think about things like machine translation and so on, so assessment, evaluation is going to be a big question in the future in language teaching. So, as I said, 7 different languages, lots of responses from all over the world, and also thanks to my colleagues who checked the translations and translated the questionnaire, and also helped me to translate the responses then. Now, 109 responses, but some of them were only one-word responses, just short answers to the question. So we discarded them. I looked at 87 different responses, translated everything into English apart from the German, which I did in German, and looked at it and summarized and tried to analyze those responses and cluster them together in the different types of responses. So after several rounds of analysis, I developed 5 different vignettes of future language teachers. And those are visionary, traditionalist, designer, mediator, or a critical voice as well. So there is, in more detail, the visionary. So this is a teacher who really embraces technology with enthusiasm, somebody who welcomes the opportunity to experiment, not just with new tools or new media, but also using pedagogic innovation. So doing little things, even if it's not emergency, if it's not necessary, just out of curiosity and out of wanting to move the profession forward. There is connected to this role also a commitment to know current developments, to inform themselves about things like artificial intelligence, about machine translation, about virtual reality, and so on. And to read out the quote from this teacher, definitely somebody in 10 years who believes and hopes that the majority of English teachers around the globe are working with projects, virtual exchange, and will make his role or her role as a teacher easier. So there's definitely an enthusiasm for change and a willingness to experiment. The second type, and we've talked about that before, is the traditionalist. So this is a type of teacher who sees the value in tried and tested methods, who sees the value in, for example, grammatical correctness, in teaching rules and teaching target language as accurate as possible. They would prefer to go back to face-to-face teaching, but accept that sometimes it's not possible. But on the other hand, this traditional teacher also provides the human face of language teaching. They know that teaching is also emotional work, that teaching requires emotional support for the students. So also this person knows that they have to use ICT a lot in emergency situations. They think that ICT cannot completely replace face-to-face teaching with the teacher as the person, as the human face. So that's the traditionalist. The designer is another enthusiastic person who sees teaching as designing materials. This is a person who steps back from this teaching role as the sage on the stage or the person in the center of providing information, and creates opportunities for learning, creates these materials that are basically self-guided materials, and then steps back once the stage has been designed, once the materials have been designed. An important aspect of this kind of language teaching design is gamification, for example, fun and games to keep students motivated as an integral part of language teaching. And this is a quote from a Hungarian teacher: "I envision my role mainly as a process manager and evaluator." So the role is still there at the end to check whether they have learned something, but basically during the teaching, once the material has been designed very well, let them get on with it. The mediator is also somebody who sees the role as stepping back, but in a slightly different way. The mediator is a language teacher who creates content and also brokers communication opportunities. For example, in tandem learning, by setting up the class as an exchange class with students in a different country, learning the different target language, or individual brokering of communication opportunities between two tandem speakers. So tandem works if somebody learns English and speaks German as their mother tongue, and the other person wants to learn German and has English as their mother tongue, or a very proficient English. By combining these two people, you could set up a tandem there, and they can basically teach each other their mother tongue. They can learn together and also gain the skills of helping somebody else to acquire language. So the mediator, actually brokers, they are in the background very much. They facilitate learning, and they use the expertise, as this German teacher says, in the organization of learning units, of learning opportunities as well. So again, this mediator, this facilitator, is not the sage on the stage. Is not somebody who needs to be central for the learning event. They are happy to take a step back. It's important, I think, to mention at this point that the development of this kind of curator of language learning materials and language learning opportunities has only become possible through the OER movement. So the free sharing of open educational resources or open educational practices has made this kind of language teaching possible, and also more and more prominent in particularly, I mean, at the Open University, open by name and open by nature, we do have a lot of open materials, for example, and language teachers during the pandemic could use open learn material, could ask for specific resources and use these in their classes as well. And the European Center for Modern Languages, again, We have a huge repository of different tools with descriptions. All of these tools have to be for free to allow this kind of language teaching in the future, this mediator, this broker and curator. Now the fifth vignette that I wanted to create was to show out of these imaginative futures of language teaching. This is the critical voice. And that's a very, very ambitious language teacher who also sees teaching, and particularly language teaching, as a social task. It's not just teaching language, it's not just teaching culture, it's also making students aware of the social issues of the wider world, basically. It's teaching in context, it's teaching as opening people's minds into the future and into other worlds as well, and particularly in language teaching. And if you consider language teaching as also having cultural elements, it's really sort of shaking your firm beliefs, it's shaking your established ideas and opening up your mind to the wider world. This has a big impact also on the use of technology, because more and more as a language teacher, you're also required to teach digital skills or critical digital skills. Tell students not to believe everything that they read, not to use every tool, not to subscribe to every information online, but really critically and with an informed mind using new technologies. These teachers also see the impact that the new technologies have on society in both senses, in positive, in benefits, but also in drawbacks. And as I said, this teacher is quite ambitious, because the goal of these teachers is to develop critical citizens, independent thinkers, mature and responsible adults. So nothing less than a complete humanistic idea of education here. And it's probably not a coincidence that this critical voice came out of a Brazilian context, where one example, one quote from a teacher there is that they are developing a sensitivity to students' needs and the critical issues of the socioeconomic, political and historical context, a critical reflection of the affordances of recent technologies. So not just assuming it's good because it's new and shiny, but also teaching them how to use digital technology with a critical mind and with understanding how it works. Now, these are the 5 vignettes that I created, but of course there's also another one, and I won't try to make everything look totally positive. There were teachers during the pandemic, and particularly at the beginning, who said, no, this is not for me. I cannot cope with this kind of requirement going online. That's not my type of teaching. I don't want to do that. There was a high level of stress and frustration, particularly at the beginning, because teachers were asked to do things in an emergency situation that they had not been trained for, that they had not got the right equipment, the right understanding of how to use it as well. So some teachers really wanted to give up, and this is not the only voice that reflected this, but there were sort of the hope, well, in 2030, when all this happens, when all this newfangled technology has to be used, I won't be there anymore. I will be retired. So that's also an option. Okay, and now it's over to you. So while I get a sip of tea and get my breath back, could you please log on to Mentimeter by just typing in menti.com on a smartphone, on a tablet, or on a computer. You will be asked to enter a code, and the code for this afternoon, I hope it's still valid, is 35266605. And I just want you to select one of these vignettes and think, which of these vignettes could you associate with? Do you see yourself rather as a visionary, as a critical voice, as a traditionalist, as a mediator, as a designer, or maybe something completely different? So feel free to add a new version, a new idea of a future language teacher to that. Yeah, I'll switch off my microphone now and check on my other screen if anybody is actually getting into Mentimeter and entering some responses here. Which of these vignettes you associate with? Ooh, I can see lots of different colors coming up, so lots of different responses already. And in the meantime, while you're responding to the Mentimeter, I've just seen the question by Shala in the text chat about how to engage students joining hybrid interinstitutional classes while most of the other students are attending in person. We've had this problem right from even before the pandemic. At the Open University, we have lots of meetings and also some classes taking place face-to-face, if we can, particularly with postgraduate students. And then some other people have to join in remotely. In my experience, you need two moderators. You need a face-to-face teacher doing the teaching in the class, and also integrating the person on screen. And you need somebody who checks all the time what's coming in as a communication from the screen. The technical equipment, of course, a 360-degree camera is perfect for that, so that the people who are remotely participating feel like part of the group. And also people in the room are aware that there's this thing in the middle, that if they're talking, they're not just talking to the person across the room, they're not just talking to the person in front of the whiteboard, but they're also engaging with people across. I hope that's answered. There's no absolute fail-safe method of doing that, but this is sort of in some cases it's a cost-cutting measure, in some cases it is an emergency measure to integrate as many people from the outside inside as well.
Shara has a supplementary question there to what you've said. What do you do if having two instructors is not feasible?
Well, I'm not talking about two teachers. I'm talking about a moderator who takes on, make one of the students in the classroom a moderator, or a volunteer, or somebody who wants to become a teacher in the future, maybe somebody who takes on the voluntary role of integrating the on-screen participants. So it doesn't have to be a second teacher. That might actually be a little bit too complicated. Then you're not teaching twice, you're just teaching once, but making sure that the communication always includes the other, the remote participants as well. Okay, now I can see the results from the Mentimeter, and oops, too short-sighted, thus I need to bring my other screen closer. 40% are designers. Perfect. Lots of designers. 27% visionaries. So we do have those visionaries who are just enthusiastic about technology and will try everything at least once. And 20% are critical voices. So there is a lot of criticality here already, understanding that language teaching is not just grammar. And there are mediators, 7% mediators. If you want to, you can click onto the second screen as well and have a look at the free text entry and give me some responses to that as well. So if you want to, you can look at the question, if you answered other, for example, or just explain what you meant with clicking one of these options. So that's up to you as well. Okay.
I do notice that we have a comment from Tanya Baksa, who says that she has a Zoom meeting with those who are online and does everything on Smartboard, and that was working fine. I don't know, Tanya, if you'd like to say a word more about what you were doing and how you made it work. not quite sure where you are. So if you would like
to have
to...
a microphone.
Oh, here I am.
Oh, great, good.
I like new technologies and I tried all these things, but when pupils are, I don't know, sick or something, then we just have normal Zoom meetings or Teams or I don't know what, and they can just see what we are doing. So when you have on SmartBot, when you do everything with other children, they can see everything and do everything with others.
It's brilliant.
So it was okay. I don't have very big classes, so I actually teach German, so my German is better than my English now.
Auch gut, alles gut.
Ja, viel besser, ja. Und ich kann nur empfehlen, book widgets. Also I use a lot of book widgets and I like those. I don't know if somebody uses that. It is good for everything when it comes to language.
Yeah.
There's lots and lots of really interesting and good tools, and I think this actually shows your participation at the results as well.
Yeah. Ah, right. So do you want to go through our statistics and see what you think?
It's fine. I think I've said the main things already. The majority is the designers, but there are quite a few visionaries, critical voices as well, and some of the others who say, well, I'm a bit of everything, and that's quite natural as well. So these vignettes are combinations of different different teachers' voices, how they feel about it, and also sort of bringing it to a point and saying these are the options for the future. All of these are probably going to happen at some point. Right, now let me just go back to the PowerPoint. Okay. We've asked this similar question to a workshop just down the road from you in Dubrovnik, in Montenegro, with the workshop in October, and asked the same question: which of these teacher types do you feel most familiar with or most in tune with? And not surprisingly, because it was a workshop focusing on ICT, there were no traditionalists. Same as here, this is a self-selected group. So people who are really very traditionalist wouldn't necessarily attend a workshop about ICT or about future teaching. So the designer, by far the most popular choice. Lots of people want to create materials. There's such a lot of creativity in language teaching that this is not so surprising. People design the environment for students to make an opportunity for them to learn. But similar as the results here in this group, that is also visionary, critical voice, mediator. These are all possible options. Okay, now let me move on to one of my hobby horses, and that is epistemology. I have to confess that my first degree was in philosophy, so I look at things sometimes in a slightly askew way. Let's just say I look at what has really changed. I see the surface level, and there are these immediate changes, the emergency teaching, and everybody just picked up their courage and did respond to the emergency incredibly well. Then there's the next step. It's a little bit deeper going, just asking them, and what are you going to take back, or what is the future going to look like? And these are very often, these are planned changes. So I'm going to be more of a mediator. I'm going to do more of the combination, for example, of tools or of hybrid teaching and so on. But there's also, whether teachers know it or not yet, there's also an epistemological change. And that's happening in the way that knowledge is created online in a slightly different way than it is in a face-to-face communication. And again, I'm going to ask you a question. Now, we haven't got enough time now, I think, for going into depth, but the tri-sider question is actually open for the next 7 days. So you can feel free to answer the questions on this online tool as well. And just think about it for a minute now. Think about what do you know? What's the difference between just maybe believing, or could be like that, or I feel it is like that, and you are absolute convinced knowledge, a certain knowledge, a pure knowledge. There's different ways of knowing it. We all know that we accept different ways of knowing as well. And just to show you a few results from the question that I asked to some of my PhD students, actually, that I did this task, this epistemological task with them, also doing PhD, doing doctorate in language teaching and language learning, but they also have to think about constructing knowledge in a research sense. So I did just ask them the same very simple question: what do you know? And some of them came up with, I know through observation, I see my feet on the ground, I see that I feel the pressure. So this is sort of sense input. Or I know I will speak English this Wednesday because I'm an English teacher. Yeah, okay, that's my identity. I know my identity. Or a very popular one is 2 by 2 is 4. Now, I'm not a mathematician. I'm not going to question this. I'm sure somebody will be able to say that is not always true, or there are different ways of saying that. But these are some of the examples the PhD students came up with. And there were also other examples, like I know that tea is hot because I've just burned my tongue, or I know that I love my daughter. And this is a completely different idea of knowledge. So that it is not the same type of knowledge that we are talking about when we say 2 by 2 is 4. And there's more and more acknowledgement also, not just in philosophy, but also in pedagogy and in educational research, that there are different knowledges, that you have to deal with these cultural differences in knowledge. And I'm not going to give you a mathematical or physical example, but my example that I want to draw on is from languages. So in Indo-European languages, the future is before you. You're going towards the future. You see it like a road you have to take, or I don't know, direction you have to choose in front of you. Whereas in Chinese language, the prepositions used in connection with the future are behind you. And the reasoning is, you don't know what the future is. The future is behind you because you can't see it. The history is like a road in front of you. It's the perspective in front of you because, well, the further it's away, the less you know about it, but you can see it. It is within your perception, within your awareness, whereas the future is behind you, you can't know it. So even this small example from language, you know that you're constructing knowledge in a different way, and the way that language expresses that makes a difference. And what does that have to do with online language teaching? Now think about the way that as a teacher, you're helping your students to construct meaning, construct knowledge, construct experience during an online interaction. You're not just talking to them and the knowledge goes in their ears and arrives in their brain. You're helping them to understand the differences. And you're using different means in an online environment than you would do in a face-to-face environment. For example, you need to, well, after COVID, I don't have to explain this the screen of video conferencing anymore, because everybody knows there are different elements. Like here in Zoom, you've got the video, you've got text chat, you've got the central area where you're presenting your content. You also have like these lovely little tools, laser pointers, where you can point to something, or little writing on a screen things. You use text chat, you use participants' names, and so on. So there are all these different features that you use, but they're not exactly the same as in a physical presence. Particularly if we think about teaching beginner language learners, learners who have very little vocabulary, but still have the same knowledge they have from their first language, but you need to have different means of telling them, teaching them the language. You use whiteboards, you use realia, props, gestures, you can point to things. And I mean, if you're a language teacher like me, you can see my hands waving around all the time. If I'm teaching in a face-to-face class, I teach with my whole body. I use gesture, I use mime, I use my body, I use walking, I use distance, and so on. So I use a lot of different means that I cannot use online. If you're teaching online, you still have to do the same things. You still have to transmit knowledge, help them create understanding, help them be critical about the other language, help them overcome cultural differences, technical problems, and so on. But you do it with different means. So if we got the time, Barry, you tell me, do we have the time for somebody to go onto the Padlet? The link is here in the Padlet for writing down what you think is different in online teaching. Oh, I can't hear you, Barry. You're muted.
I think we've got 10 minutes, and I think you can using the chat as well. If people want to put down something there, that would be good.
That's much easier. Actually, yes, then I don't have to go to the Padlet, just write it in the text chat. Yep. The difference in online communication, what is different in online communication? Why do you think that online teaching is different to the teaching face-to-face?
Yes. Very interesting comment from Michel Hatchie saying that since COVID, students have difficulty concentrating.
Yeah.
And so you have to get behind them to get them to do the homework and work regularly. That's a very interesting reflection.
It's true, but it also is a reflection on teaching with technology, because with technology, lots of teachers throw lots of different tools and stuff at students.
Yes.
And also you cannot concentrate as long. In an online environment like this, you've got a limited screen, you've got a limited area of focus, and you cannot concentrate, particularly young children cannot concentrate for more than 10 minutes. For our adult learners, we assume 20 minutes, but that's really asking a lot. If you concentrate on a screen for 20 minutes, you get really, really tired. So you need to switch tasks and tools very often, and that has a knock-on effect later on. If students are then expected again to sit still for 60 minutes and focus on one thing, they won't do it.
And Tanya's made the point that would the problem be solved if perhaps we had shorter lessons?
Yeah.
But that means the curriculum has to change, which means school regulations have to change, etc., etc.
Etc., etc. There's also definitely for younger children the idea of letting them move freely, so not just sit still and consume input, but also explore and experiment with walking. I did it with my PhD students as well, as this walk and talk, because you think differently, you're more creative when you move your body in a direction and at the same time talk about what you want to do. Okay, of course, who said it? Taking a laptop to a beach is not a good idea. Yeah, but taking a laptop out into the park, for example, is a good idea. Getting a different environment, getting more creative again.
Yeah, interesting point from Sandra Garcia to say that many teenagers in classes won't turn their cameras on. So you find yourself teaching online to just a name on a screen, if that.
Yes, but you would be surprised how much other users, other contributors actually put emphasis on these screens. When I showed you this, the screen here with the video conferencing, we did an eye tracking study with a colleague of mine, Shi, and we noticed that students, even if they were just listening, they looked at the student's name in the list of people online. They looked at the student's name who was just speaking. So in a group of online students in an online tutorial, people will recognize the presence of somebody else by their name. It doesn't have to be the video camera. It's nice if it is. It's nice to see your face, Barry, all the time, but it is also this symbolic presentation, just the symbolic presence of people is sometimes enough.
Okay.
Right.
I'd like to bring in, if I may, my colleague Francis Brassard from Dubrovnik.
Yep.
And he made the point at the very beginning of the presentation that actually people had been using blended learning, including new technologies, before the COVID pandemic pushed it right into the forefront. And I don't know quite your reflections, Francis. Do you really feel now that in teaching language, as you do at university level, are we really now in a situation where we are going to be living with either hybrid teaching or online teaching, and that it is going to develop necessarily, and then maybe teachers who are not so committed or so able to handle online teaching may find themselves massively at a disadvantage and maybe at the end of their careers?
I can't really answer that question. It's
Okay.
I'm not a language teacher, but and the reason why we did that it was because out of necessity to keep the existing staff and the number of students did not justify to have live teachers. So somehow they managed, they buy the equipment and so forth. And this year, actually, my son is taking one class that is online, and he really disliked it. Sound is not the same, and when the teacher comes, because they have to come once a month, it's a totally different experience. It's like, and I always thought sometimes, I mean, this is maybe a personal thing, but when we are listening to someone, we just don't listen to voice, but we are kind of feeling the presence of the person, and that seems to play an important role in the way we acquire, assimilate a language. That's my personal experience. So,
and that's a perfect link for me to my next slide, and just looking at how we see the difference between online teaching and face-to-face teaching. And particularly novice online teachers tend to look at the deficiency view, because you've always got in the back of your mind, I would do this if it were a face-to-face class. I could do this. I could have more visual clues. It would be more immediate. It would be more personal. And there's lots of reports from teachers and from participants in online meetings saying, oh, it lacks personality. I can't feel that the person is really present. I can't get the immediate feedback. But if you talk to experienced and really good online teachers, they present you with a view of difference rather than deficiency. They show you exactly what you're doing differently, how they use the affordances of the medium and of the different media to, for example, use multiple modes to reinforce, to use text chat plus emoticons plus their voice plus something else that they've designed. So they create an environment that multiplies the opportunities for students to learn, maybe not in projecting their own personality, but in allowing students to come in different ways. And that was for some of the more disadvantaged students, that's really, really important. We've got a very high level of students with declared disabilities at the Open University. And it's not just sort of visually impaired students or students with hearing problems, but for example, students with anxiety. And for those students, this adaptable pace of online teaching is really an advantage. They can just text chat. They don't have to show their face. It's not always necessary. And I do appreciate the teenage question here. Yeah, teenagers very often get totally distracted if they have their own face on there or they don't want to show their face. Yeah, allow that. It's okay. It's a question of personality as well. And it needs to have another medium than another means of giving this kind of contribution. It doesn't always have to be the same for everyone.
Miriam Fisher, thank you for that. Miriam Fisher-Callas has come up with an interesting idea as to how to get people to turn their cameras on. Miriam, what kind of encouragement would you offer them? Sounds very interesting, this.
Well, as I said, I would offer them some kind of prize if they leave the camera on. It could be a nice visual that I will send to them, or perhaps a personalized letter, some things that they might appreciate. It depends, of course, how old the students are. If it's a blended thing, perhaps you can offer that you do meet face to face. I think there are lots, if we think about it and reflect, we might come up with an idea of what we can give our students if they stay motivated and if they keep the camera on. It was, yeah, perhaps some others might have some other ideas. I would send them a song that they like. I would do something on the internet, whatever.
That's a really lovely idea.
I think one key problem that we're all facing as teachers is that when all's said and done, our teaching is still very dominated by the course book that has been adopted by the school or by the director of studies for the one that everybody is using. And these course books are very, very good. They do their job very, very well. But is there a problem in the way the course book can effectively be used in a hybrid or online class?
Absolutely, absolutely. And I think the course book publishers, the language publishers, are becoming more and more aware of that problem as well. That it's not just that the online material is not just supplementary to the main thing, the course book nowadays. They have to create something that really grabs the students' interest, but is of high enough quality to satisfy the teachers, but also the sort of high expectations of young learners about quality of online materials. With Netflix and everything, the quality goes up so much. So if you produce a mini language video clip and it's sort of too gray or too boring, or the sound quality isn't good enough, young learners will immediately pick up on that. So I think, yes, there's definitely a question of making institutions aware that online teaching cannot just be taking the offline materials and putting it online. So
Okay.
Thomas had a question, then Sandra as well.
Yes, so Thomas, would you like to go first? I think you got up there first, then we'll go with Sandra.
Thank you very much. Just a very short question. Uschi, I would like to know how you personally see the situation in 2030. So I'm asking because I know several, perhaps even a lot of colleagues who are back to their old selves. That means who teach exactly the same way they did before COVID. Will we be in a kind of back on-site approach? Will we be into a fully online approach? Will there be any kind of hybridity? And above all, will students still benefit from what we learned during the pandemic? So what is your own prognosis? Thank you very much in advance.
I hope very much to convince people of sort of my final slide point things, that there are epistemological changes. And I hope with my work I can contribute to make people aware that this is not just a short-term, just moving medium. It is a change in teaching approach. It necessitates a change in pedagogy. It also needs staff development, and that's not a short-term fix. And I'm not talking about just giving them a tool and showing them which buttons to click, but real development of understanding communication in a different way. And I think if we as language teachers don't pick up on that and don't sort of go with the flow and teach our students how to use machine translation, how to use an online video conferencing tool properly, how to integrate different media, how to do mashups, how to do whatever new digital ideas come up in the next 10 years, there won't be a need for language teachers in 20 years, maybe not in 10 years, but in 20 years. Sorry, Sandra, that was a pessimistic note. I didn't want it to come out pessimistic. I think we will be there.
Okay, so make the most of your career. You don't have long. Sandra.
So I teach in an academy in Ecuador, and we basically teach English and basically online, right? So we have some events that are face-to-face, but most of the time it's online. We have small groups. We try to make everything we can to make this interesting, but sometimes it's not. And when you repeat the same activity, for example, one of the activities we try to do to to keep students interested on their subject and also to turn their cameras on, is like to bring an object and to describe the object. Yeah. And therefore you have to turn the cameras on and you have to say, this is my pen, it's blue, I like it, it's cheap, it's expensive, and so on. But then when you repeat the same exercises once and again, then you get a little bit bored. So we have tried to look for new alternatives, but now I see that most of teachers, we also identify as designers. It means that we also try to make it interesting, right? So otherwise we're going to get really bored. Sometimes I'm teaching and no one wants to turn their cameras on, and then as the class goes on, and then they turn their cameras on. There are many things and many reasons behind, but this is, I think, one of the biggest challenges: how to make these classes engaging and interesting. When you repeat the same strategies, then you get bored easily. So
I think you've answered your own question by saying that lots of you are designers and you've got this whole creativity in you, and this is for me one of the most enjoyable parts of being a language teacher, that you can use your creativity to engage students. But also, yes, having cameras on when you're talking is important, and as language teachers we particularly think it's important that they see how our mouth moves, how we use gesture and so on. It's not necessarily the same priority for students. And I think we need to accept that and maybe show them the difference. It's one of the methods we use in our workshops is do the same activity online and offline, and then compare and say, is it really worth using the technology? Is it worth, what's the difference? What's the different feeling? And so, and you could do something similar with your students and just say, this half of the class turns on the camera, the other half doesn't. I mean, there are research projects showing that people with the camera turned on get asked questions more. So you interact more with those where you see the faces. But on the other hand, some students might find it much more comfortable if they don't have to look at the faces all the time. You don't know, but you need to give them a voice in selecting what you're doing as well.
Ushi, thank you very much for that. We're just slightly over time. I don't know if you have a comment you'd like to make as a concluding remark.
Just thank you very much.
Great. Before I pass it back to
fun
Thomas,
image at the end, so to know how much we appreciate every language teacher and all the different roles that you're playing in your work.
Wonderful. Thank you so much for that, for a fascinating session as well. May I just mention one thing before we pass it back to Thomas, just to say this. We had last year a webinar on techniques for working with language teachers by somebody who used to teach at Warwick University in the UK, now freelance, Russell Stannard, S-T-A-N-N-A-R-D. If you go to the webinar list and you scroll down, you'll find the recording. You'll find stuff on his webinar, which I think will be very useful and would be well worth knowing about. Once again, Ushi, thank you so much. Wonderful session. And may I pass us back now to Thomas to close us all down.
Thank you very much, Barry. So when we were talking about cameras on and off, I was thinking why we might have our cameras off at times as the audience, but I think our motives will be different. We don't want to take the presenter's limelight. For students, let's say students are as considerate as that, although I doubt about that, I must say. Dr. Stickler, Ushi, if I may, so thank you very much for your most enlightening talk. And we all now know that the situation has not finished. That means we are still, we're at the end of the pandemic, of course, already, but we are still in this aftermath as far as teaching is concerned, and we have to really be aware of not falling back to our old bad habits, perhaps, or let's say pre-COVID habits. They may not necessarily really have been bad, but pre-COVID habits. So thank you very much for raising our awareness in these ways. And I'm sure that once we do our teaching after having attended your talk, we will do it differently than we might have done beforehand. Let me quickly draw your attention to some other activities going on. So on the 7th of December, we're going to have Professor Isa Hartmann's talk on intercultural encounters and translingual picture books, literary and pedagogical perspectives. That's kind of French-German based. This will be definitely very interesting and very enlightening as well, as I hope. We're going to have Silke Riegler on the 26th of January, who is talking about engaging presentations. Check. And last but not least, nearly last but not least, I would like to draw your attention to the ICC Journal, whose editor Barry is. Barry, would you like to add some more information on the ICC Journal or some updates, anything which might be of relevance now?
Comes out 3 times a year. We are delighted to hear from you and to publish your work, what you do, your summaries, and indeed your research, because the keynotes are very interesting. ICC Journal is for practicing teachers, and actually your ideas, your thoughts are what we want to hear. Go online, have a look at it, and if you like it, we would love you to contribute. Alles gut.
Thank you. So what I just found was that I haven't shared the screen yet, but never mind, most of the things I told you were actually displayed overly, so to speak. And then there's Eurolta, the European Certificate in Language Teaching to Adults. Miriam, you're responsible